On March 11, 1944, smoke began pouring from the chimney of an empty mansion in one of the wealthiest districts of occupied Paris. The neighbors at 21 Rue Le Sueur had endured the smell for days. It was thick, greasy, and impossible to mistake for ordinary coal. When police and firefighters forced their way inside, the furnace in the basement was still burning. Human remains lay near the fire. More were discovered in sacks and in a pit filled with quicklime. Upstairs, the rooms were silent. The owner was gone. His name was Marcel Petiot, a doctor, a former mayor, and a man some believed had risked his life helping Jews and resistance fugitives escape the Gestapo. In his house, investigators found dozens of suitcases, hundreds of garments, forged papers, and a sealed triangular room with double doors and a peephole. One item was smaller than the rest, part of a child's pajamas. It belonged to 8-year-old René Kneller, who had disappeared with his parents. The police had not uncovered a German torture site. They had opened the private house of a French physician who sold hope to people with nowhere else to turn. And somewhere in Paris, the doctor was already preparing a second identity, one that would place him inside the hunt for himself. Marcel Petiot was born in Auxerre in 1897. Long before the occupation, his life had accumulated warning signs: erratic behavior, psychiatric examinations, disciplinary trouble, and repeated encounters with the law. Yet he was also intelligent, persuasive, and capable of presenting whatever face the moment required. The First World War gave him another mask. He served as a soldier, was wounded, and spent time under medical and psychiatric observation. Afterward, he completed his training and established a practice in Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. Patients saw a doctor. Voters saw a rising local politician. In 1926, he became mayor. Scandal followed him. There were allegations of theft, fraud, narcotics offenses, and financial misconduct. He lost political office, moved to Paris, and rebuilt himself again. The city was large enough to absorb a damaged reputation. A white coat, a confident voice, and a medical title did the rest. Then German forces entered Paris in June 1940. Occupation changed the rules of disappearance. Arrests could happen before dawn. Jewish families were isolated by law, marked, registered, and eventually deported. Resistance members, deserters, criminals, and anyone wanted by the German or Vichy authorities searched for forged documents and secret routes out of France. Official records became dangerous. Silence became protection. For a predator, it was nearly perfect. By 1942, stories circulated about a clandestine escape network called Fly-Tox. Its leader used the name Dr. Eugene. He supposedly moved fugitives through Portugal and onward to Argentina or another South American destination. The journey was expensive, often described as costing 25,000 francs, and clients were expected to bring cash, jewelry, and their most valuable possessions. The instructions sounded like the precautions of a genuine underground operation. Tell no one. Travel alone or only with immediate family. Pack everything needed for a new life. Leave no forwarding address. Do not contact anyone until safely abroad. Every instruction also made the victim easier to erase. Petiot did not build the network alone. Recruiters such as Raoul Fourier, Edmond Pintard, and René Gustave Nizonde directed people toward Dr. Eugene. Whether each man understood the full scheme became a major question. To a recruiter, a client entered the doctor's system and vanished because the escape had succeeded. To relatives, silence might mean the family was hiding safely overseas. To the police, a missing fugitive was someone who did not want to be found. At 21 Rue Le Sueur, the final stage began. Petiot presented himself as calm, practical, and medically responsible. Before travel, he explained, South American authorities required vaccinations against tropical disease. The logic was ordinary enough to lower suspicion. A frightened person who had survived raids, checkpoints, and months in hiding could finally believe the worst was over. What happened next cannot be reconstructed with perfect certainty. Petiot destroyed bodies. Witnesses did not leave the house, and his later statements were designed to confuse. Investigators believed he used injections, poison gas, or both. The triangular chamber with its sealed doors and observation hole suggested that victims could be confined and watched. But the precise method may have varied, and Petiot never offered a trustworthy account. The result was clearer than the mechanism. Clients disappeared. Their luggage remained. Cash, jewelry, coats, dresses, shoes, identity documents, and household valuables accumulated in the property or were moved through other locations. The people who had arrived expecting to rebuild their lives became a private inventory. Petiot did not merely exploit wartime terror. He converted it into a system in which the victims performed most of the work. They gathered their wealth, concealed their travel, entered the house voluntarily, and ensured that no one knew where to search. One disappearance eventually drew the attention of the Gestapo. German investigators had heard rumors of the escape line. They suspected a real resistance network operating beneath their control. A prisoner named Yvonne Dreyfus was reportedly used in an attempt to penetrate it. He went to meet Dr. Eugene and vanished. The Gestapo then arrested men connected to the network. Petiot himself was detained and interrogated. The Germans wanted routes, names, and contacts, but there was no transcontinental organization to expose. The supposed mastermind could not reveal a functioning escape line because the travelers had never left Paris. After months in custody, Petiot and the arrested intermediaries were released. German investigators had failed to prove the resistance conspiracy they imagined. Their mistake gave Petiot something invaluable, a story. If the Gestapo had imprisoned him, he could claim it was because he had served the resistance. That lie would soon become his entire defense. 2 months after his release, smoke escaped from Rue Le Sueur. When emergency crews entered on March 11th, investigators initially struggled to understand what they were seeing. Burned fragments and dismembered remains made identification difficult. The courtyard and basement produced further evidence. The house contained a staggering collection of property, 72 suitcases, and hundreds of kilograms of clothing and personal effects were cataloged in later accounts. There were no passengers in Argentina riding home under new names. There was only their baggage. The number of victims became one of the enduring uncertainties of the case. Authorities could associate remains and possessions with specific missing people, but destruction had erased much of the evidence. Petiot was ultimately prosecuted over 27 alleged victims and convicted of most of those killings. Investigators and journalists suspected the real total might have reached 60 or more. Claims far beyond that remain estimates, not established fact. Petiot understood the uncertainty better than anyone. Each unidentified fragment gave prosecutors a crime without a name. Each missing traveler gave him room to claim that the person was alive somewhere abroad. And every victim with a criminal or collaborationist connection could be transformed into proof of his secret war against Germany. He escaped before police could hold him. For 7 months, one of the most wanted men in France moved through a city approaching liberation. He grew a beard, acquired false documents, and became Henri Valéry. When resistance forces rose against the occupation in August 1944, Valéry joined the French forces of the interior. The disguise was more than cosmetic. He became a captain involved in counterintelligence and prisoner interrogation. The accused killer now wore the authority of the resistance. A man whose victims included people fleeing persecution could question suspected collaborators. In some accounts, he was even assigned to searches connected to the fugitive Marcel Petiot. It was camouflage built from the moral chaos of liberation. Paris was changing governments, settling scores, and trying to distinguish real resistance fighters from opportunists who had appeared in the final hours. Records were incomplete. Units formed quickly. A confident man with forged papers and medical experience could become useful before anyone examined his past. Petiot might have survived inside that confusion if he had remained silent. He did not. The resistance newspaper, Resistance, published an article accusing him of serving the Germans and murdering patriots. For a fugitive using a new name, the rational response was to ignore it. Petiot instead sent a letter defending his honor. He insisted that he had fought for France and that the dead connected to his house were Germans, collaborators, or traitors executed by his underground organization. The message told police that he was alive and still in Paris. On October 31st, Inspector Henri Soutif recognized him near the Saint-Mandé-Tourelle metro station. The bearded captain carried a pistol, money, and numerous identity documents. The man arrested as Henri Valéry was photographed, searched, and returned to his real name. Dr. Eugene had been found. The trial opened at the Seine Assize Court on March 18, 1946. France had emerged from occupation, but the courtroom was filled with its unfinished business. Victims included Jews trying to escape persecution, people connected to the resistance, ordinary criminals, and suspected collaborators. This mixture was exactly what Petiot needed. He could use the identity of one dead German agent to cast suspicion over an entire list of missing families. The evidence formed a wall around him. Suitcases were stacked inside the courtroom like abandoned luggage at a railway station. Clothing was read into the record piece by piece. Families identified possessions belonging to people they had hoped were alive overseas. Investigators described the furnace, lime pit, sealed room, and human remains. René Keller's pajamas did something a statistic could not. A child who could not plausibly be recast as a Gestapo executioner had entered the doctor's route with his parents and never returned. Petiot responded by turning the trial into theater. He interrupted lawyers, mocked witnesses, contradicted himself, and offered a defense large enough to swallow every accusation. Fly-Tox, he said, had been a genuine but independent resistance group. The people he admitted killing were enemies of France. He claimed a total of 63 executions, while denying that the missing civilians before the court were his victims. If prosecutors lacked a complete body, he suggested the person had escaped. If they had remains without an identity, he called the dead a collaborator. The strategy exploited a real problem. Clandestine war leaves few clean records. Resistance members used aliases, agents changed sides, criminals worked for both occupiers and underground groups. Some of Petiot's alleged victims did have compromising connections, but no recognized resistance organization confirmed the vast secret army he described. Men who had actually fought underground challenged his claims. The heroic network existed mainly in Petiot's words. His financial trail told a simpler story. People entered Rue Le Sueur carrying portable fortunes. They vanished. Their belongings remained in Petiot's control or appeared among property linked to him. Whatever uncertainty surrounded his exact killing method or final victim count, the pattern repeated. Promise, isolation, disappearance, theft. On April 4, 1946, the court found Marcel Petiot guilty and sentenced him to death. He continued performing until the end. Appeals failed. On May 25th, shortly after 5 in the morning, he was taken into the courtyard of La Santé prison and executed by guillotine. Later retellings give him polished final lines and a theatrical smile. Contemporary accounts agree more reliably on the fact that he remained hostile and defiant. The mythology around his last seconds grew because Dr. Satan had already become a character larger than the evidence. That mythology can hide the most important part of the case. Petiot did not need supernatural intelligence, an army of accomplices, or control of the police. He needed a society in which disappearance had become normal. The Gestapo removed people from apartments. Deportation trains carried families east. Resistance networks demanded secrecy. Fugitives abandoned names, papers, and routines. Mail failed. Borders closed. In that environment, a murderer could imitate a rescuer because both required the same thing from their clients: absolute trust and silence. The war did not create Marcel Petiot. His record of deceit and criminal suspicion began long before German troops entered Paris. But occupation gave his predation scale, camouflage, and a population of victims who could not safely ask the state for help. It also gave him his final lie. When the evidence closed around him, he did not deny that people had died. He changed the moral category of the dead. Refugees became traitors. Murder became execution. Theft became confiscation. A sealed room became a resistance tribunal. He understood that if he could place his crimes inside the violence of war, certainty itself would begin to dissolve. Some mysteries remain. The total number of victims is unknown. Not every recovered possession was matched to a name. Whether every recruiter was merely deceived remains debated. Petiot's missing fortune generated rumors that others must have shared in the operation. But no evidence establishes the grand wartime conspiracy suggested by his defense. The proven story is dark enough. A doctor offered endangered people a route out of occupied Europe. He told them to bring everything valuable, cut contact with everyone they loved, and trust him with their bodies. Then they vanished so completely that for a time both the Gestapo and their families mistook silence for escape. What made Marcel Petiot possible? One exceptional predator, or a society where fear had destroyed every system of verification? Tell us where you place the responsibility in the comments. Subscribe to the Modern Ledger and continue to the next case, buried beneath the official history of the war. Occupation kept its records, so do we.